There's a shift happening inside the Browns building right now, and it's bigger than a single practice report or a single stat line. A few weeks back, Shedeur Sanders was still the quarterback everybody wanted to poke, prod, and test. Every throw got dissected. Every mistake turned into a talking point. Every solid practice got treated as something he still had to go prove all over again the very next day. That energy has changed. Sanders isn't just surviving this competition anymore. He's starting to make believers out of people inside that organization who weren't easy to convince in the first place. I think it's worth naming exactly why that initial skepticism existed in the first place, because it wasn't purely about arm talent or draft evaluation. There was a lingering question about whether he could handle the operational side of running an NFL offense. The cadence, the checks, the line management, all the unglamorous parts of the job that never show up in a highlight package. That's precisely the kind of skepticism that takes real, sustained evidence to overturn. Not a single good practice or one impressive throw against a backup defense. What's changed over these last several weeks is that the evidence has stopped being occasional and started being constant. I want to walk through exactly how that kind of shift actually happens, because it's never one loud moment or one perfect practice that flips an organization's mind about a young quarterback. It's a mechanism, a pattern that builds slowly until it becomes impossible to ignore. A good day from Sanders used to get filed away as a pleasant surprise. Now, it's just the expectation. One strong period turns into another strong day. One sound decision becomes further proof of real growth. One correctly handled blitz becomes the reason a coaching staff feels comfortable handing him a little more responsibility the next time out. That's exactly how trust gets built at this level, snap by snap, read by read, one smart check down at a time, one moment where a defense changes the picture mid-play and the quarterback still finds the right answer anyway. And the substance behind this isn't just about flashy throws either. Every quarterback in this league is capable of making an impressive throw here and there. What's actually changing the conversation is how comfortable Sanders looks running this entire offense. The ball comes out on time, he works through his progressions with real patience when his first option isn't there. When things break down around him, he stays alive in the pocket without turning the play into total chaos. That's the exact trait Todd Monken has been hunting for all camp. Not highlight reel plays, but genuine function. Understanding the call, getting the whole huddle lined up correctly. Reading the defense pre-snap and knowing precisely when to attack and when to hold back. Just as telling is how he handles it when things go wrong. We've documented plenty of dropped passes and missed opportunities from the guys around him this camp. And instead of sulking on those mistakes for the rest of a series, Sanders gets right back into the huddle and attacks the very next snap like nothing happened. Teammates notice which quarterback stays steady through adversity. Coaches notice which quarterback can stop a single bad play from snowballing into an entire bad series. Fans notice which quarterback actually wants to be standing in that exact moment when things get difficult. That body language is exactly why this story has grown beyond a stat sheet. People are genuinely starting to trust what they're watching with their own eyes. And once that kind of trust takes hold, a quarterback competition can flip a lot faster than anyone expects. The national conversation has caught up to this shift too, and it's gotten noticeably louder and more direct. One well-known football commentator with real ties to Sanders' inner circle didn't hold back recently, arguing that this young quarterback never really got a fair patient evaluation because everybody's been ready to crucify him from the jump. But the sharper part of that take wasn't really about the player at all. It was about the situation this organization has actually built for itself. This league runs on avoiding distractions, and coaches generally hate anything that pulls focus away from the actual football. Here you've got a competition between a quarterback who draws constant outside attention purely because of who his family is, and a veteran who was genuinely trending toward a Hall of Fame career before the off-field fallout, the surgeries, and everything else derailed that trajectory. His conclusion on pairing those two situations together was blunt. He doesn't think it works, and he suggested the front office ought to seriously reconsider the entire setup. His actual solution was refreshingly simple too. Hand Sanders the job for a full year. If it works, you've found your answer. If it doesn't, you go find someone else in a future draft. A second national voice made essentially the team-building version of that exact same argument, and honestly, the logic underneath it is hard to poke real holes in. Starting anyone other than Sanders at this point looks like a mistake on paper alone. Watson has appeared in a shockingly small number of games across these last several years, dealing with shoulder surgery on his throwing arm and an Achilles tear layered on top of everything else. At some point, an organization simply has to find out what it actually has in its younger asset. This franchise is sitting on 2 first-round picks heading into next year's draft. What exactly is the plan if Watson does play well down the stretch? Pay him again on top of everything already on the books? And then there's the broader business context layered underneath all of this. Cleveland is building a brand new stadium, and new stadiums get sold to the public and to season ticket holders on the promise of a young, homegrown franchise quarterback leading the way into that new building. Running Watson back out there does essentially nothing to serve that future. You can debate the tone of how that argument gets delivered publicly, but structurally, it's genuinely difficult to punch a hole in it. Every meaningful path forward for this franchise. The draft capital sitting in the bank, the new stadium, the salary cap situation, all of it runs directly through actually finding out what Sanders is capable of. There's no version of that discovery process that involves him standing on the sideline, holding a clipboard. There's also a leadership dimension to all of this that never shows up cleanly on any tracker or stat sheet. And it came from someone who's actually led an NFL locker room himself. The praise for Sanders started well outside the lines of the football field entirely, pointing to his work in the community, how genuinely he engages with high school kids, the philanthropic side of who he is as a person. And then came the sentence, "Every single organization dreams of hearing about a young quarterback they're trying to build around. Players genuinely love him. People respond to him. There's a real natural pull to want to follow him." But buried inside that praise was the actual coaching insight that matters most here. Once a quarterback is officially publicly named the guy, a coaching staff can lead through him differently. They can correct him harder, demand more from him specifically, and use him as the actual standard for how routes get run and how the rest of the offense holds up against pressure. When a quarterback hasn't been named the guy yet, it's genuinely harder for a staff to coach him at that same intensity. In other words, naming Sanders the starter isn't just a line on a depth chart. It unlocks an entirely different mode of team building that stays completely locked up as long as this competition keeps dragging out. And the conclusion from that same voice was direct. Guys want to run through a wall and play for him. And that's exactly the kind of energy a coaching staff should want to embrace as a program. That's the thing about genuine belief inside a locker room. You can't fake it, and you certainly can't schedule it to happen on command. The energy around certain players either shifts organically or it simply doesn't. With Sanders, by every account trickling out of that building right now, it's genuinely shifting. And quarterback competitions were never purely about the quarterback in isolation anyway. They're about everyone standing around him too. You can own the strongest arm on the entire roster, throw the prettiest ball in every single practice session, collect every highlight clip that gets posted online. But if an offense feels flat and lifeless the moment you step into that huddle, if your own teammates don't fully trust what you're doing out there, that reality eventually surfaces everywhere, whether anyone wants to admit it publicly or not. With Sanders, we're watching the exact opposite play out in real time. Receivers are competing harder, specifically on his reps. The entire offense visibly lifts the moment he takes over a series. A room has organized itself around his standard without a single coach having to formally order it to happen that way. I think that last detail is genuinely the hardest thing to manufacture artificially in a football building. Coaches can install a scheme, they can drill technique relentlessly, they can demand effort in every single meeting and every single walkthrough. But they cannot manufacture the specific feeling of a receiver running a route 10% harder because he trusts the guy throwing him the football, or an offensive lineman holding a block that extra half second because he believes the play is actually going to matter. That kind of buy-in either grows organically around a player or it doesn't, and no amount of coaching intervention can force it into existence artificially. It's worth remembering everything he's actually had to work through just to earn that kind of organic trust. The dropped passes from teammates around him, the constantly rotating personnel groups, working behind a second-team offensive line for stretches, the daily scrutiny that's followed him since the moment camp opened. He's kept the exact same command, regardless of who's actually standing in that huddle with him on any given day. That's the quiet test a coaching staff runs on a young quarterback all camp long, without ever announcing it publicly. And he keeps passing it rep after rep. Here's the part of this story that should genuinely keep a front office up at night. At the start of camp, Sanders had everything left to prove. He was the younger guy, the later pick relative to Watson's draft status, the one everybody assumed should simply wait his turn patiently while every mistake became a built-in excuse for more patience from the outside. But when a young quarterback refuses to actually wait, when he keeps stacking good decisions on top of each other, keeps improving in exactly the areas his coaching staff is actually measuring, behind closed doors, keeps organically pulling his teammates toward him without being asked, the entire burden of proof flips onto the other side of the argument. Now it's the coaching staff that has to explain why he should keep waiting at all. That's a completely different position for an organization to find itself standing in, and it's exactly where Cleveland sits today. Just listen to how Monken talks about him at this point in camp. He's not describing one good practice anymore. He's describing extending plays, instincts, what happens the instant a pocket breaks down, climbing forward in the pocket instead of drifting backward away from pressure, working cleanly through full progressions under duress. Those aren't the kinds of things a coach says about a player who simply had one nice day. Those are the exact traits coaching staffs build entire offensive systems around. Monken has coached quarterbacks throughout his career, who create real production once a play starts to break down around them. And he knows the difference between reckless improvisation and genuinely controlled creativity better than almost anyone. He also knows precisely what one extra second of composure in the pocket does to a defense trying to defend it. That distinction between reckless scrambling and controlled improvisation matters more than casual observers usually give it credit for. Plenty of mobile quarterbacks around this league bail from clean pockets at the first sign of pressure, turning a well-blocked play into a disaster through pure instinct rather than actual football sense. What separates a quarterback a coordinator can genuinely build around is the ability to feel pressure without being ruled by it, to buy an extra beat of time specifically because he trusts his eyes will still find the answer somewhere on the field. That's not a trait you can fake your way into during a single strong week of camp. It either shows up consistently across a full body of work or it doesn't, and by every account coming out of that building, it's showing up consistently for Sanders right now. None of this means the job has already been formally handed over, to be clear. This staff is still going to keep grinding through protections, through reads, through footwork, and full operational command, the way every competent coaching staff does at this exact point in a real competition. But Sanders keeps handing them clean, usable tape every single time he steps on that field. And clean tape is precisely how trust compounds over time inside a building like this one. Once a coach starts to genuinely picture what his entire offense could look like with one specific player running it long-term, that picture doesn't just disappear once he walks away from the film room. Strip all of this down to its actual core, and here's what you're left with. A quarterback who was supposed to spend this entire year simply proving he belonged in the conversation at all, is instead forcing this organization to answer a far harder question than anyone expected heading into camp. What exactly is everybody still waiting for at this point? The national conversation has already moved from give this kid a real chance to just start him for a full year and find out. The energy inside that actual locker room has moved from simple curiosity about who he is to genuine followership from his own teammates. And the head coach's own public language has quietly shifted from strict evaluation mode into something that sounds a lot more like construction, like a staff actively building something specific around a player rather than still deciding whether that player belongs in the building at all. Something is genuinely changing in Cleveland right now. The only real question left is whether this organization chooses to move with that shift on its own terms, or whether it eventually gets dragged there by a body of evidence it simply can't keep ignoring much longer. Whatever this coaching staff ultimately decides in the coming weeks, the shift itself is the real story right now, not the eventual announcement. Organizations rarely change their minds about a young quarterback overnight. It happens exactly the way this one appears to be happening. Quietly, gradually, through weeks of accumulated evidence that eventually becomes too consistent to explain away as a fluke. Cleveland is standing right at that tipping point today. Whether the front office is ready to say so publicly or not,